Anyone ever find a dead body unintentionally? What's the story? Walked out back one morning to let my dogs out. It was early, so it was pretty cold out. I look over and I see my neighbor sitting in a lawn chair in his yard. I get closer thinking he might have fallen asleep or something the night before and it was just too cold to be chilling there. As I got close, I see he isn't moving and then I see a puddle of blood next to him. Then I see the shotgun. He shot himself in the chest. He was an older guy, former cop, who lost his wife like a year prior. He may have gotten some bad medical news himself shortly before he did it too. It was surreal though. Had a paper round when I was a kid. Part of my round was delivering to a retirement block. On this day I stepped out of the lift and as I approached the door to the corridor I saw a trail of blood running underneath it. As I opened the door an old lady was laid head first down on the floor with blood pouring from her head, her front door open. Tried to help her but she was clearly gone. I chucked the paper over her body and into her flat, and ran down to the warden's flat. 40 years later, remember it as clear as day. Got offered counseling and a trip to McDonald's from the police. Not me, but my girlfriend's aunt. She was a teenager at the time and was walking home from school through a green space with a friend when she saw a black bag on the ground and kicked it. She thought it felt weird and checked to see what was inside and found someone's torso. After police arrived they started searching and found multiple leather bags with arms, legs and a head. Found out later that a group of guys went to rob someone at a house party and ended up killing him, then dismembering him to try and hide his remains in different areas. Pretty fucked up thing for a teenager to find. Andy and I were curious because we hadn't seen our new roommate that just moved in a few days before, or knocked on his door that morning. He didn't respond, but his car was out front, so my boyfriend opens his bedroom door, and there he was laying face first on the ground between his bed and a desk. He couldn't have been there that long, but already his body had started to smell. We called the ambulance, and they came out and eventually called the police. They knew nothing, so at first my boyfriend and I were suspects because it was our house. Not me but a friend of a relative. They were doing maintenance work on a really rundown block of flats. The people who lived there would just throw their appliances and furniture in the alleyway at the back of the flats instead of disposing of it properly, so he had to move a load of stuff to do the work. One of the things he tried to move was a rolled up carpet, but it was unusually heavy. He looked down the end and saw what was quite clearly the top of a man's head. He called the police and it turned out to be a missing person from a town about an hour away. I passed an older lady while walking my dog. She was acting a bit strange but nothing alarming when I saw her. Shortly thereafter, she approached some neighborhood kids, maybe 14 to 15 age range, trying to give them her car keys saying to take it, she doesn't need it anymore. As I was walking back into the house, I heard a pop and figured one of the skater kids had some firecrackers. Late June, so again, no real concern. The cops swarmed the block. She had a mental health crisis and shot herself in the heart with a .22 just feet from those poor kids. I was 14 at the time. Lived with my mother. I woke up at 9 a.m., went to my bathroom and my mother was on the floor. I called ambulance and performed CPR. When I found her, she was face down, so I had to roll her onto her back. The worst part was, she was an alcoholic, so I was used to finding her asleep in random places. This particular morning I was poking her, telling her I was late for school and she needs to wake up. I then made her a coffee and kept shouting at her to wake up and have her coffee. She obviously didn't. She died due to alcohol poisoning. Was about 12 years old. Had gone down to visit some family in El Salvador. I was on my way to the ice cream show when I noticed a kid looking at an object on the ground in the middle of the street. As I walked closer, I realized it was a dead body. Somebody had shot this guy in the head in plain daylight. Other adults showed up a few seconds after I did and someone in the area called the police. I just stared at the body for a bit as I couldn't comprehend how it happened at that time of day. That was over 25 years ago and I remember it like yesterday. Back when I was really young there was a guy that died on the sidewalk outside our house in New Jersey. I remember going outside to wait for my dad to walk to the bus stop and thinking there was a trash bag in the way. I didn't realize what really happened. I realized it was an issue because my dad went inside to call the police, but I didn't realize it was a person until my mother was talking about it years later as one of the reasons we moved. She was telling her friend Keith Pam found a dead addict outside and I was like, oh shit, when? Back when I was really young there was a guy that died on the sidewalk outside our house in New Jersey. I remember going outside to wait for my dad to walk to the bus stop and thinking there was a trash bag in the way. I didn't realize what really happened. I realized it was an issue because my dad went inside to call the police, but I didn't realize it was a person until my mother was talking about it years later as one of the reasons we moved. She was telling her friend Keith Pam found a dead addict outside, and I was like, oh shit, when? Driving home after working a 12-hour overnight shift on a cold February morning in Minnesota. Stopped at grocery store for sustainables. Saw an overturned car about 150 off the road, with random possessions scattered all around it. I stopped, called the sheriff as I walked over. Didn't see the driver until I crested the slight hill the car was on, confirmed he was DOA with the 911 operator. Are you sure? Well, he's ice cold and his leg has been snapped off. If I hadn't wanted an omelet, some other poor soul would have had to find it. We had a guy drop off 2 tools for repair at our store. He put the tools on the counter. Our counter salesman grabbed tool repair forms to fill out. He looked up and he was gone. He looked over the counter and found them on the ground. Our AP gal was trained in CPR, worked on him but couldn't get a pulse before medics showed up. He never regained a stable heartbeat. Worst part about it was his wife was in the car waiting for him. Our counter manager told his wife, and she said their next stop was a cardiologist for a checkup. Found human skeletal remains on the side of the road in Ransom Canyon southeast of Lubbock, Texas. Was I backroading looking for rocks and shooting nature photography like I often do, and found a skeleton with a little bit of meat still on its bones laying flat on its back. Found out it was a Hispanic man in his 70s a few weeks later from a newspaper article. They never said anything about a cause of death, but there's no way he died of natural causes given the way I found him. That's probably all I'll ever know about it. Emerald Wadi, Al-Qaim, Iraq. We were inserting into an urban hide in Al-Qaim and crossing through the wadi. Appointment halted us because of the smell of death. We found the source. It was what appeared to be a partially consumed human infant carcass. It was gray in the moonlight. The abdomen was missing, and most of the soft tissues had been ravaged by scavengers. We radioed it in, and because our mission took priority, we marked it with an infrared chem light and pushed on. The QRF that responded never found it. Still fucks with me. Had an older employee that didn't show up for work one day. He had been with us over 30 years. Never late without a call. Wouldn't answer. Lived alone. I drove out to his address. A trailer in a rural area. Car was parked next to it. I knocked and looked in the windows. Couldn't see anything. Called 911. An officer responded in about 30 minutes. He went in. My employee was dead in his bathroom. Face half shaven. Looked like he dropped dead in the middle of getting ready for work. The officer was so upset I had to console him. My grandfather found his brother hanging from the ceiling fan one night when he got back from work. He always has night blindness and didn't see his brother hanging when he entered the apartment they used to live in. Turns out he had hanged himself just after my granddad left for work in the morning. The light switches were on the other wall, so he actually crashed into his brother when he was walking towards the switch. He still has severe PTSD from that incident and refuses to go into a dark room or a dark space in general. I hadn't heard from a friend in a couple of days. We met in rehab and she continued to struggle with alcohol and dead. I was going to a barbecue and had a weird feeling, so I drive by her house to check on her. She had died in her bed. It was beyond tragic and still fucks with me today. She died in squalor, leaving behind her 2 Pomeranians. The police let me take them home until someone could get them. This was March 2020, about a week before everything locked down. I miss you all the time, Bex. I'm glad you're finally free. This is currently ongoing and thus has no news articles about it, so I'm not too sure on the situation. However, while some of my friends were driving alongside a busy road in my small hometown, they discovered a dead body on the sidewalk as they drove by. Turned around, and called the cops. We all have no idea what happened and they discovered the body only a week or 2 ago. It's kind of scary, especially since the police in my area haven't reported on it yet. I just know because the experience traumatized my few friends. About 2 weeks ago. I work as a hotel manager, for one of the cheapest hotels in town. Lots of drug activity. You know the kind of place. This was a sad case though. The guy checked in and was a recovering alcoholic trying to get back on his feet. His AA sponsor actually called and paid for the room for him over the phone, told me the situation, and said if he gets to drinking, he will die. I guess he had got to drinking, and so 2 weeks later my 17-year-old housekeeper opens up the room to a bloated dead body. Very sad. Worked at a movie theater. It was a weekday morning, so usually pretty slow for us. Went in to clean a showing of The Hateful Eight. There were only 2 people in the theater. One in the very back, and one towards the front. Walk in to clean the theater, see the guy up front. Figure he was sleeping, happens sometimes. Say a couple things to see if he'll wake up. He does not. Get spooked and call my manager. Manager shook him a couple of times, realized something was wrong, called the police. Dude was dead. My bell captain, at the time, found a guy in a room at the hotel we worked at. It was past checkout time and he knocked on the door and then opened it up. The guest had hung himself via what appeared to be autoerotic asphyxiation. Guy was a manager of a strip club in Atlantan area. He attended an annual, Christmas strip club party at the hotel the night before held by Jack Gallardi. I retrieved his valet car a couple days later for his parents who came by to pick up his car. This was back in the early 2000s. Biking on the trail that followed the Mississippi River and found a guy who hung himself. I was in denial and thought it was a dummy. Called the cops and took them a while to arrive. Cop walks up to the body and shines his flashlight in the guy's face, then yells to me over his shoulder, "Yup, it's a dead body, alright." Morbid, but I couldn't help but laugh. Local newspapers were quiet, but a few weeks later a brief obituary ran mentioning that the individual was accused of sexually abusing his partner's children.